Closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
Illinois is currently bleeding red ink. The state is facing a $43 billion deficit. It owes billions in unpaid bills, and the pension system is in shambles. How did we get into this mess, and how do we get out of it? That's the focus of our discussion today on The Professors. Joining us to talk about Illinois' current budgetary and political crisis are Ann Lucene, professor of law at the John Marshall Law School; Akbar Dima, political science professor at Chicago State University; Nick Panamitros, attorney and professor at Kennedy King College, UIC, and Harper College; and Connie Mixon, political science professor at Elmhurst College. Thanks. Illinois has a $43 billion budget deficit.
Who says?
Well, I've read a
Ted
Boy,
says.
Ed, I tell you, you know,
Ted says.
I can always count on you to help us engage these conversations. I've read a bunch of different studies. Do you have another number for me?
No, because every number I've seen, and when I've checked it out, people have said, well, we made certain assumptions. And if you make different assumptions, you're going to come to different figures.
Okay.
So it's gone I've seen so many different ones, I can't even remember all of them.
Mm-hmm. So let me, go ahead, Connie.
Well, the reality is Illinois really hasn't had a balanced budget in years. And contributing to it is the rising Medicaid costs, pension costs. And the recession of 2008 really created a perfect storm in which all of this came together. And Medicaid is driving a lot of it, unfunded pension liabilities. And at a time of recession, when we've had more of a demand for services, our revenue sources haven't kept up with that demand.
Yeah, I've read, and I'm sure Ann will challenge me on this, but I've read that we're looking at $83 billion in unfunded pensions, between 83 and 200 of the numbers that I've read. But obviously, regardless of what the exact figure is, we've got a really serious problem, especially in the area of pensions. What were you going to say, Nick?
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, the overall world recession is a big factor in all of this. Like you said before, we hadn't, or I think Connie mentioned, we hadn't balanced any of our previous budgets in the past, but when the world economy was doing well, the United States economy was doing well, it wasn't really a big issue. So it's actually partially due to the world recession.
Well, and we started emergency borrowing from the pensions after the 2001 terrorist attack, and we just kept doing it.
Right.
So, Dr. Dima, what do you think about why Illinois is struggling to pay its bills? I mean, the other side I think is very interesting. Not only we're looking at this deficit, but you know the state of Illinois owes $4 billion in unpaid bills, and I've read many different places that many agencies who are getting money from the state are taking 7 months to actually get paid, which is crazy if you think about it.
Yeah.
So what's going on?
I think you covered the question in your opening remark very well. How do we get here? And how are we going to get out? Let me begin with the first question. The reason we are in the position we are is there is a provision in Illinois Constitution which says that in any given fiscal year, expenditures shall not exceed revenue. So to cover for that particular provision in the Constitution,
Which is a good provision if you think about it.
which is a lukewarm way of saying we should have a balanced budget. So they have been borrowing from the pension funds to pay for it. When the economy, the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular grew in the 1990s all the way to 2000, the state expanded the services without paying into the pension the money they needed to pay. Instead, they were paying less to the pension funds and expanding the services that people demand. I think more fundamentally, the reason we got here is because of this, and it boils down to this reason. The politicians and policymakers have been delusional in their promises that taxes should remain at the Stone Age rate, where we pay prices at the 21st century. The fact of the matter is this: government pays for prices that we pay at the current rate of pricing. You cannot keep revenue enhancement policy positions in the Stone Age and
And
expect not to have a
and
problem.
that's a very important point.
But see, if I may continue, Anthony Downs, an American economist, has said that political parties, if they want to win, they should promise the majority that which they want. And the majority of Americans don't want to pay higher taxes. So for all these decades, they have been promised these low taxes, which is essentially a great gift. I'm sorry.
I didn't say anything. I was just looking at you. I agree with you on that.
So at some point, somebody will have to have a political will to say, we cannot continue to make this promise that is completely disingenuous. We will continue to be in this position.
Nick, what do you think? You agree with that? You think that, and honestly, even more so, who's going to do that in the political climate we live in?
Yeah, I agree with him that the politicians are interested in what the majority thinks, and what the majority thinks, I think is they want a quick fix, and nobody wants to pay more, and so therefore it makes it hard to resolve issues long term. And so part of the problem is that there's no long-term plan because it's not very appealing.
But we've put forth an income tax increase in the state for this reason, right?
That's going to sunset out in 2015. I mean, our real problem tied to these budget issues is the fact that Illinois has a really dysfunctional government, and the politicians haven't had the backbone to make the hard decisions that are needed.
Okay, Professor Lazine, but you
question.
sure?
Oh yeah, listen.
Yeah, because I know we were talking about.
I might fire you off on that.
Connie, you shouldn't do that.
She's been too quiet for too long.
Yeah, I've been quiet too long. I was asked people, what are you willing to give up? You personally, what are you willing to give up, each of you?
I am willing to pay higher taxes to see
income tax
to help the state get out, and I am willing to make other sacrifices too.
I'm not.
But this is the reason we can't have a collective decision that we get out of this problem. Everybody wants what he or she wants from the politicians, and they are willing to oblige whether or not the money is there.
So what's your point? What do you think?
Okay, I am willing to give up the fact that I do not pay income tax on Social Security because I'm now receiving Social Security. That would be probably anathema to the vast majority of people who receive Social Security, and certainly to any politician. When I've suggested it to them, they say, oh my God, I wouldn't do that to the old people of this state. I said, well, fine, you're going to do it to the next generation then? And we've had that since 1980. We brought in the income tax in 1969. It was a very nice, clean income tax. And then we started, and by we, I include all of the citizens and taxpayers of Illinois who agreed with this. We're going to start giving everybody a little something. My feeling has been that when I've looked at the pensions over the years, one of the things has been we've always been at about a 40% rate of funding. But that was okay as long as we could get the pension funds could get a great return. Starting in 2008, they did not start getting a great return. The teachers' retirement system used to have a great little return. They did some wonderful investing. But they can't do that anymore. Nobody can do that anymore. And you see anybody getting huge returns on money anymore? And until that happens around the country, you're going to see that problem.
But there's also the question of trust. I mean, you're talking about willing to pay more taxes. You're trusting that the politicians won't pull another scam like that one, or the lottery. If you remember when the lottery came about, it was supposed to fund education, and it does.
It does.
But the money that was funding education prior was pulled out.
So they
pull the fast one on the public.
We're going to get gambling, and they're going to say this goes into education. We're going to get gambling, and I'll bet you we're going to have higher social services from people with gambling problems.
The income tax, state income tax, was supposed to be a temporary tax. Now it's not. The tolls for the expressways were supposed to be temporary. They're not. So how can you trust them to do anything?
Well, my position was predicated on the fact that the politicians and policymakers will be accountable and do what is right. But I also think that the issue goes beyond those of us sitting at the table here. And I say that because if we look at what other states are doing, our retirement age to receive benefits is 55 years of age. If you want to solve the problem, you can increase that to 65. And I don't think there are not too many people
We
who are
saw what
going to
happened
be...
in France when they tried to increase the
Yeah.
retirement
Well, and the
age,
state
right?
could meet its obligation, too,
Right.
on the pensions. They could actually make their annual retired contribution.
Right. So if we move the retirement age in the state to 65, which is the federal level 66, as the case may be for some baby boomers, then you are going to delay the payments they are going to receive, and you are going to bring up the levels of
The
family.
idea was to take them off the current payroll.
Exactly.
Let me tell you
That's a
something.
big thing.
Let me ask you something about the budget here. You know, there's a lot that goes on in Illinois that's not on in the budget. You
Yes,
mentioned
yes.
the Illinois tollway.
Right.
That is not in the budget.
right.
I don't know how much else is not in the budget. If we were to bring some of those in, we might actually have, if not a balanced budget, quote unquote. And I know how to balance budgets. I mean, I used to work for them. I knew how to. What you do is you estimate, you pick a number that is higher than what your expenditures are, and then you balance the budget,
Maybe you should
right?
run for governor, Ann, because...
No, I did not work for government.
That's maybe you should run for governor, is what
I'm
I
not
said.
running for nothing, let me tell you. But I can tell you that if we brought all of those in, you'd see a somewhat different financial picture. That's why I said earlier on, who says? How would you like to run for office on the policy position of let's bring the Illinois Tollway Authority under the state budget? What do you think would happen?
I don't think you have an agreement for that. They would want to
Oh,
rather...
I think it sells with the public.
No.
Okay, fine. Then look why are we in this mess? You just
But that
answered
is
it.
partly why we are in the difficulties as we are. The other problem that we have that is causing some of the things you see in the budget, some say $85 billion in underfunded pensions, is that the credit rating agencies have downgraded Illinois to an A. Both Moody's and Fitch.
A2 on Moody's.
Yes. So you have a situation where borrowing is more expensive for Illinois. Companies that would otherwise come here are not willing to do so because of the pension problems and political corruption. So it is going to cost Illinois more to borrow money as it has been, and that will add to the deficit and other problems. And then you have a situation where many of the people who would want to come here and work may not be willing to do so because they will be forced to pay for some of the mistakes that the politicians have made in the last 30 years.
Illinois has the worst economic and political reputation in the United States. The Civic
Have you ever
Federation...
been to California? Come on. In California, they're paying in script. They're paying some bills in
Our
script.
bond rating is actually lower than California's at this point.
The bond rating may be lower,
Right,
but
that
when
is
they're,
correct.
the real down-to-earth thing is they were, I remember I was there 3 years ago when
Oh, well,
they
they've got
started
too much
paying in
democracy
script.
in California, as far as I'm concerned. They've got
Too
way too
much
many
democracy.
referendums.
I like
That's
that
the
one.
problem.
Too much
Too much
democracy.
democracy. But the
What-
Civic Federation says that this bond rating is costing the taxpayers of Illinois $550 million in interest payments annually.
That
Absolutely.
assumes that we're borrowing. Of course, the
Absolutely.
question is why
Let
we're
us just
borrowing.
agree. Let us just agree that we have a big problem. And we may differ in terms of the magnitude of the problem, but how are we going to address this problem and what are the dimensions of this problem?
Why are 47 states in the red?
We're all states are experiencing this same perfect storm.
I don't know why, Ann.
Of 2008 in
Alaska
Medicaid.
is not, because Alaska has a huge tax on oil drilling, and they got plenty of oil.
Right.
I want to move their oil down here. Okay. And North Dakota and I think Montana
Wyoming.
are the other. Is it Wyoming? Okay. They got oil. They got, in North Dakota they have natural gas. Okay. We don't happen to have that.
But it
You
doesn't
know,
mean we, but it doesn't
they're
mean we
not
can't
any
be
better
fiscally
than we are. They just
responsible.
got certain resources. I'm sorry.
But it doesn't mean we can't be fiscally responsible, though. Like, for instance, you know, there's a $1.6 million, or excuse me, $1.6 billion in Medicaid cuts that have come through.
2.7,
yeah. And so, if you think about this, as you mentioned earlier, nobody wants to cut Medicaid politically. No one definitely wants to cut Medicare, because you mentioned, you know, when you talk to a politician about paying higher taxes for seniors, and I mean, he almost, you know, lost his mind. Not necessarily on principle, but really, if you look at it on politics, because seniors vote and they vote consistently, right?
My state rep ran on a platform of no cuts to Social Security and to Medicare. Those are federal programs. My state rep can't do a darn thing about them.
Right. But it worked, huh? Probably.
She won.
Yeah.
How about this? Why don't we just cut out Medicaid? Let's tell the poor they can die.
No, we can't do that.
Well, that was actually Paul Ryan's budget, by the way.
When I was a child, that's exactly what we did. You want to go back to fiscal responsibility of the 1950s? Let's let the poor die.
No,
I mean, I have said
but
this
why
to
do
people.
we have to do that on the back of the poor?
No, I think I don't think she means that sincerely. I don't think she means it sincerely.
I mean, you want to do it, we can get rid of Medicaid, you know.
Well, let's get rid of Medicare then. How about that? Right?
That's a federal program.
Well, yeah, but
Medicaid is a joint program.
Absolutely,
with the
but
states.
we're talking about this budget crisis period.
Yeah,
so,
we're talking about Illinois.
But we've been doing that. A lot of the cuts in Medicaid have not been fat cuts. They've been actually cuts for essentials. If you look at, say, for instance, dentistry, for adults, they're basically covering nothing right now. Just
But
extraction,
Illinois
nothing
has a
else.
broader range of services
yes.
provided for Medicaid than many other states. And we did make cuts to dental's gone now, and what, every 2 years
adults,
for
yeah.
eyeglasses.
Yeah.
And
But her,
those are essentials.
fundamental point, though, you know, whether it's, we're talking about federal, state level, we're talking about, your fundamental point was, hey, in order to balance budgets, we ought to cut programs that people are supportive of and that help people like poor folks. And the truth is, unfortunately, that's the reality at some level. Now, it doesn't have to be just poor,
It can't
right?
just
Yeah,
be
but
cuts, though.
but you know why that
It's
will
cuts
not
and tax
happen?
increases.
You know why that will not happen? Any politician who proposes
right.
that program and passes it is going to be out the next
they just
election
put through
period.
$2.7 billion in cuts in Medicaid in the state of Illinois.
Yes, but
Absolutely.
the problem is they cannot continue those cuts. You can see the flag that Governor Quinn went through cutting these mental
They're lined
health
up in
programs.
Springfield.
But look at this even on the federal level. So once again, you know, Paul Ryan made his name being, you know, a budget slasher, right? He came out with this budget, right? But then once again, you get into the debate, the vice presidential debate, and he literally says, "Oh, I love all these programs. I mean, they're great. My family
His
lives
mom is
in
out with them.
Because he can't win on that position.
And that's
now,
the truth.
but
So maybe it's our fault, not the politicians as much.
Yes.
Because we, as you said, don't want the reality of our fiscal situation.
the point that must be emphasized is this. If we don't and we are unwilling to take the bitter pill now, some of the programs in the Obamacare will kick in, which will require more responsibility, fiscal responsibility on the part of the state.
Okay.
And our problems will exacerbate. Here is what I think the federal government can do. We have Obama in his second term. We have Dick Durbin, who is the deputy leader of the U.S. Senate. They have proposed a transportation infrastructure with its hub in Chicago that is supposed to be the engine of growth for the Midwest. If they can push through that program, it will bring jobs, it will bring economic growth, and gradually we'll continue to address this. But it's not going to be a short-term fix. It's going to be a long-term, drawn-out political negotiation among all involved.
What you're talking about, Ted, and I think it sort of answers your question, or goes to your question, or answer rather, is that the politicians are, you know, basically marketing themselves to what the majority wants. If they were acting as a trustee in the best interest of the public and saying, hey, you're going to have to take a bitter pill for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and the trust was there from the public, then I think we could fix this problem very easily. But as it is right now, people don't trust the politicians. Politicians don't act as trustees. They just want to win the next, their platform is just to win the next election. We don't care about 10 years from now. We just want to worry about this next term. And how can things get fixed that way? There's not always a quick fix.
We keep kicking the can down the road. Governor Quinn called a special session in August. They didn't get anything done.
Quick fix.
Yeah.
Well, now that he has the supermajority in both houses, maybe he can do something.
Well, Quinn is going to have to get Madigan to agree with him on that, right? As of the November election, Democrats control Springfield.
Absolutely.
And there's a supermajority. They don't need Republicans or
let me
Governor
tell
Quinn.
you-
Or Governor Quinn. It's a veto-proof.
Connie, let me tell you what happens when there's a supermajority. I've seen it. When any party, either one, has an absolute clear majority, the thing they do is immediately break into two camps. Whether you call them liberal and conservative,
That makes sense.
or A and B, or you want to go to the Civil War and say the blues and the grays, it's, so help me, they split into two camps. And that's exactly what I've seen it happen many times before. They're going to, you're going to see it again. Because they know that when they
You're going
come
to see
together,
Chicago
they can win.
Democrats
Yeah,
versus the rest
exactly.
of the state Democrats.
And there's really no, once again, and I think the point of the trustee is very important. There's really no political benefit to making those tough choices. You know,
Well, you'll never be, if you can't get elected, you can't put your policies into effect, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you say what we get you elected, and saying what we get you elected is not necessarily in the best interest of the state.
Yeah.
And the incumbent party is the third party. They stick together, especially around elections. I think.
The incumbent party, yeah.
Yes, third party of the United States.
So, I mean, obviously, we've recognized that Illinois has a significant problem. We also look at the fact, and we've looked at a couple other states and seen that, I mean, these problems are national, and yet we've got a unique situation here due to a variety of other factors. So I think, what do we do just besides, you made the point, it's not just about cuts, right? It's about increasing revenue sources, right? It's about looking at, you know, and I think this is the interesting thing. If you think about even at the national level, you know, President Obama has, you know, promised, if you will, to balance the federal budget, you know, by essentially just taxing the rich. That's it, right? So we're not going to tax any of you. We're going to just tax the rich, and you know, and he kept saying, well, you know, I just want to make it so that the people who can pay more, we just pay a little bit more. But I don't know that our problem is going to be fixed by just taxing certain segments. So even in Illinois, for instance, we upped subsidiary taxes, which are sin taxes, right? And cigarettes, that sort of thing. And those are politically, I think, okay, because you just take one segment of the population and tax them. But I don't think we're going to get there just doing that. I think we're going to have to do a lot more.
We have way too narrow of a tax base in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and the nation. Yeah.
Yeah, Illinois itself has too narrow of a tax base. For one thing, for example, is we don't tax services in Illinois. Most other states tax services. Services in Illinois make up 60% of the economy. We tax goods. So, for example, if you buy a lawnmower, you buy gasoline to fill that lawnmower up, you're actually paying a sales tax on that. You hire a lawn service, you don't pay any taxes on those. Those services aren't taxed.
And you know, we used to have a tax on services until the income tax came in from from sometime in the 1960s until 1969. We had a tax on services called SOT, the Serviceman's Occupation Tax, and part of the deal to get the income tax was to get rid of that.
Yeah, but
now, how do you get it back?
Right.
How would you get it back?
But why would you
Connie?
want to bring it back? That's not
I
good.
agree.
That's not
the
healthy.
economy.
That's the way the economy is going. Illinois
Yeah.
is service dependent. Look at what's driving the global economy. It is services.
Economies
it's
that
not
are heavily
necessarily goods.
taxed do not do well. You look at a lot of the European economies, which would be more parallel to ours.
I'm not talking about a heavy tax. I'm talking
The more
about
you
taxing
tax, it's not
services.
necessarily better.
Yeah. Well, Illinois right now ranks 29 out of the 50 states in terms of the business tax climate.
Right.
So on the one
again,
hand,
who
right?
says?
Oh yeah,
Come
I know.
on,
Here
who
we
says?
go. Who said that? Some crazy person, and you know, came up with these
He has an
charts.
eject button
and
You
over
know,
there.
and when I ask businessmen, what do you look for, and why would you come to Illinois? And they say, we love having O'Hare Airport. We go in and out of O'Hare,
And the
boy,
city
how
of
that thing
Chicago
was
is a
created.
major attraction.
Major attraction. And then they said one of the other things we look for is a reasonably well-trained workforce and a fairly stable climate. And they, down around 4th or 5th, believe it or not, is relatively low taxes.
But by contrast, some go away to other states like Iowa because they say there is too much corruption. In Illinois, their pension liabilities are too much, and
they're
so
gonna
on
pay
and
for
so
it.
forth. So I don't think that there is a network there with the O'Hare. But we also have companies coming here, like Boeing, that has just has
And we
relocated
give
its
them,
headquarters
what,
here.
millions in
lately.
subsidies.
So companies, we have various reasons for coming here. I think
I know,
Chicago is a
it's-
great place to be. I welcome all companies here, but that is not going to happen just because I say so.
But isn't it a catch-22 though? Because like you just mentioned, we give Boeing subsidies, right? But if we don't give the subsidies and we don't give the tax breaks, then they won't come.
They will go.
But if we do, then we have a financial crisis. So what the heck do we do,
There are
right?
now 28 for-profit hospitals in the state of Illinois that are getting tax benefits in millions every month. In millions every month.
Because of the they don't pay property taxes?
No, not that. The argument is that they treat people who are unable to pay. So in essence, they are incurring expenses and the state is reimbursing them for this free treatment that they give.
You mean Medicaid or what?
Not Medicaid, people who go to emergency care.
It's a separate program that, not Medicaid, what?
They get paid, they treat them for free.
That aren't in the Medicaid program.
Sure.
Right?
Okay, so the state reimburses the hospitals for that.
So are you suggesting that they shouldn't, or?
Well, I'm suggesting that they should, but that is where we'll continue to have problems.
Yeah. But I would argue, like you argued earlier, that rather than sort of balancing the budget on the backs of the poor, let's address these subsidies. Let's address these other questions. Let's address the issue of our credit rating, and so we can borrow money more cheaply. Because at the end of the day, those are the things that I think would help us to move in the right direction without necessarily having to victimize folks who really can't defend themselves. You know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if we are going to have any changes in the tax code, it must be progressive. It cannot be on the backs of the poor. The people who make more money should pay their fair share of the taxes, and the politicians should be held accountable so that money that goes through is costing in terms of corruption will not be there, and we can gradually...
What do you say to the argument that if the fair share of the rich, that's exactly why corporations won't want to move into Illinois? I don't want to pay all that much.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, folks. I can't believe this. I'm saying this now, but we're out of time.
I didn't even get to my graduated tax rates.
I am so sorry, Connie, but you know what? We do have an after show that'll be online, and we'll be able to talk about those things there. So please join us online right now at WYCC.org as we continue the conversation. Thanks for watching The Professors. We'll see you next time.